importing transactions, pricing, learning how to audit transactions, and just any other validating the taxes, right? So when you think of all of the things that we're doing from conversion that we're automating off of the auto fueling platform, the cards, customers, a lot of that information is, very close or nearly perfect on conversion, but there's a couple of things that are set up a little bit more uniquely just because the two systems don't have the same structure. One of those is taxes and the others is pricing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about both of those, or how to check those, spot check the transactions when you're dealing with pricing or importing and processing transactions. And so ultimately, where we want to get to with this training, right, is show you the highlights and what to look for, and then coordinate a follow-up session that'll be more one-on-one with your data, with your transactions, and kind of walk you through exactly how to process in parallel. And the goal would be for you to get practice, learn the system, but also to validate those setups. And the best way to validate them is through processing transactions. And the part of processing those transactions that we'll see, sometimes there'll be questions, and that's where the one-on-one will be helpful. That if there's a transaction that doesn't look right, so Craig will be helping coordinate some of those one-on-one sessions. And I'm thinking in conjunction with the one-on-one for that, we may also want to reconvert the data or get a new backup and reconvert those. Craig, how long do you think it would take from getting a backup and reconverting?
Since we've already done it once and have most of the things identified, probably 2 hours at the most, I'm hoping. So getting their data, we only have to grab the data set, so it's quite a bit smaller than pulling the whole thing like we did the first time. So we only have the data folder to get.
Okay. And ultimately, as we're doing this training and we're setting a time frame for go live, we're going to try and avoid doing a go live at the same time as a Pacific Pride cut over to the controller sunset, because there's just going to be too much stuff going on for that to be successful for any of us. So the step beyond that would be the next step, right? We're doing the training, recording some of the videos, giving some one-on-one trainings as well to make sure things are as clean as possible for you. But the actual trigger on when do we want to go live for somebody, that's going to be based on when you can go live, or when you feel like you're ready and we feel like you've put in the effort. Like we're trading up multiple customers at once with the expectation that if something happens for one customer, and another customer is ready, we'll still be able to take a couple of people live, either December 1st or January 1st, or it really depends on that timing and how successful testing is. So that's where, if I've got somebody who's doing a lot of testing and pulled in a week's worth of transactions, ran invoices, and done all their little processes, I'm going to give priority to that person for go live over somebody who, if they haven't had a chance to get in there, we don't want to set up for an unsuccessful transition. Right? We want you to be familiar with the system, know that the setup is good and conversion is good, and there's no point to rush to something that's not going to be successful. So with that, knowing that from this training, we'll reconvert fresh data so you could be doing parallel, and then we'll schedule some one-on-one training sessions with each of you to get to just walk through that process and process one or two files together and check out the transactions comparatively. So in this example, I'm actually using Erica, your data for processing for the card lock, and I was just looking for somebody with sample data that would be a little bit more relevant. So one of the things to note is when we're processing and importing files is we're going to go to the card fueling menu. We're going to go to the transactions option here. And then from the activity, there'll be a button here for importing transactions, and it looks like I'm going to delete these old ones. So we do have some options here for batch posting, batch delete, batch recalculate. So batch posting is typical process. Batch delete is, that's if you imported in a wrong file and there's duplicate transactions and you want to get rid of them. Batch recalculate is if you make a pricing change and you want to actually tell it to recalculate transactions and apply those pricing or tax exemptions or anything along those lines. That could be done en masse, or you can recalculate, delete, or post any of the individual transactions. So I'm just going to clear this out from a starting point. And then I'm going to process in a new file. So today with auto fueling, you are actually going and getting the data from the controller. And the controller has a means of pushing data to you as an option. And when we're transitioning people live, we'll actually be doing that option for you or helping you either set up the controller or the controller will be sunset. So this will more closely match the new method of getting data, even with the new participant PT file. You'll actually go out to a website and download it. So this process of directly downloading a file from PacPride's controller, we're expecting that the file already exists. So you can see here is where I've got a post date, the network we're importing this for, and then for PacPride, I can go browse out to that file and can pull up this sample file we want to get. One thing to note on the post date, as you're processing files, if you're processing them once a day, this post date is actually going to assign all the transactions on there. So if there's any lagging transactions, maybe it's 2 weeks later and there's a transaction from October, by using this post date as an option here, it's going to make it so you can actually identify lagging transactions, because the original transaction date will persist and then the post date will be separate. So these are going to look a little odd since they are from April. But as I go ahead and finish this process by clicking the import button, this is going to go through, read all the transactions from the file, price them, tax them, etc. So this is your coffee break moment, unless you only have small transaction files. I think this one with 86 transactions was pretty reasonable for the sample training today. On this import logs, you'll actually get a preview list of any transactions that have errors. So this could be a new product on the network, this could be an invalid card, but this just gives you a recap of what was processed, what the activity was. From there, if we refresh this transactions list, you'll see there's our 86 transactions processed, and then we can actually jump over to different tabs here. So if you wanted to see all the unposted transactions, they're on this first tab. If you want to see just the invalid transactions, that would be, again, those ones with the errors that were showed up on the log. This gives you the ability to see just the ones you're going to fix. So this is typically where I would start with is, going into a transaction, finding one that's invalid, updating it, correcting it. So for the purpose of this training, just to be able to go a little bit more detailed, I'm actually going to fabricate a invalid card and delete and reprocess these again. You learn more from errors than you do from perfection, right? The card. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trick this card into thinking it's invalid. And then I'll delete those transactions and re-import them. So from last week's training, we talked about the card accounts and how we can go in and add cards and maintain them and edit them, right? So if I actually just add this as Z, something that this is no longer going to find a match on that card, And I'm going to leave that there because we're going to want to fix Erica's cards when this is all said and done. So I'm just going to do a batch delete on these again, clear out these cards, and then I'm going to reprocess that transaction. And then this time we shall see an invalid card error. And usually if the card is invalid, that'll also give you an additional error that the customer is going to be invalid to because we use the card defined. Yeah, so we can see here, unable to find the card number, and because we can't find the card number, we can't find the customer. So you can see there's two transactions that got errors that were both using that same card on the import file. So typically when you see an error like that, so you can still see the 86 transactions are out here on unposted. This will show transactions with errors and without errors. But we can also go to the invalid transaction tab here and see just the two that have those errors. And you'll notice here as you're looking at the grid that the customer number, name, card number, that information is all missing as well. So I'm going to actually go back and correct the card, and then I'll fix those transactions to assign the card. And so if I open these both up, so I can select multiple records from the grid and then open up that transaction to see it in detail. So as we're processing through, right, we can see here now the card is missing, and you can still see the errors on this errors tab within the transaction. So if I start typing in that card number, it's going to go out and find it. Let's say I added that card into the system, and then I can save this transaction. And it looks like we're getting some errors on potential pricing. So that's good. We'll be able to check some more errors or resolve a couple of different types of problems, and then Erica's database will be even closer to being accurate. You win by 1 in 3 chance. So from here, I had one other transaction that was invalid. I'm going to go fix that one, get it a proper card number as well. And this is getting the same error, which makes sense, since that transaction took place on the same day. Okay, so if we're looking at, so now we've got the hard errors are taken care of, we've got a couple of these other transactions, and this is where I want to start looking at this from a couple of different scenarios. So this comes down to the auditing of the transactions. So this grid is a report that can be exported out in multiple formats, and you'll see this throughout the system in our grids, but we can export it out to Excel, PDF, text, CSV. So if you wanted to print this and compare it to an imported data file from auto fueling and kind of get them side by side by looking on paper, that would be how you would do it from there, or you could just be spot checking the information and kind of looking for different types of scenarios or transactions. So as I'm looking at the grid, I've got date, time, customer, cards, products. I've got all these settings here, and I've got more columns here. And so I can actually continue to show different columns. And so there's multiple other columns in here for if we've got, we want to know how it was priced or what the transfer cost was. Or there's one in here for a transaction type that's, I typically show that one. And the reason for showing the transaction type is, usually you're going to have a couple different ways transactions are priced, and usually they're pretty consistent depending on the actual transaction type itself. So in this example, I've got local network. Those are your sites. We also, if we scroll down, we'll see there's a remote that's within PacPride's network, somebody else's site. And then extended remote is the third type, and that is somebody else's site, but at a retail site. So those extended remotes they're part of the extended network of transactions. So as we're looking at those and really trying to figure out and what looks good, we can filter on these columns. And so a lot of times I'll recommend that if we're going to do filtering, that we sort this either by product, by price, by date. And so you can just see there's a couple of different ways to really audit this information. So one of the things that I'm noticing here is that this site ALC, it's not showing any taxes. So that's a big red flag to me that there's obviously going to be taxes on different products of gasoline, diesel. And so I'm going to check an additional piece of settings here. And question for you, Erica, this ALC, this is your site, correct? All right, and that site is in Tennessee, so we're going to assign it to this Tennessee tax group. So a unique thing about taxes, very similar to auto fueling, if it's a network tax, we're using the import of the taxes from the files. But when it's your own site, we give you the option of overriding taxes in defining your own taxes. So the network may not itemize taxes in the same way that you want to, and because that's your state and your location, you can actually control and override the taxing at your location and actually anywhere, but it's typically not recommended that you override taxes everywhere, because that means you could potentially track taxes in all 50 states, and that's no fun. So from here, we've got, as we've reviewed and refreshed this, and now looking at this, so since I assigned those taxes to this site, now we've got different tax codes that popped up for here. And Craig, can you just give me you were getting some of these rates out of auto fueling, is that correct?
Right, all of those should be set to what they were as of 1/1/2017. So, and these tax rates I actually got from the state of Tennessee. So almost all of those have been set, but if there was anything changed maybe since April, because most of these were set back in April and May. So some states had some changes on July 1. So
yeah, Erica said she's one of the lucky ones as well that had those. I just saw her comment pop up that, yep, they're all wrong because it changed on July 1st.
Yeah, okay.
We'll have to take a closer look at, obviously when we're auditing this, we want to make sure that the taxes in the relationship, the taxes are set up as accurately as possible. And one thing that normally we want to double check on this is, like I'm looking at this state sales tax, and this is adding an extra $1.66 to that state sales tax. And there's not a lot of states that charge sales tax on fuel, maybe 10 or 15 of them, and I don't recollect if Tennessee is one of those. But this is one of the things that we want to make sure that if sales tax doesn't apply to gasoline products or diesel products, or it only applies to off-road products, that we get those tax configurations accurate in the beginning. Obviously, otherwise we're going to have problems with tax reporting and what taxes were collected from customers. So the two big areas that we want you to be reviewing when you're looking at transactions is prices, and taxes. So in this example, it looks like we're starting with a 5-cent price. And so we want to, talk through some of those examples of what's going on with this screen. So the first section at the top is the easy information, right? It's the date and time the transaction took place, what network it occurred on. There's that post date that got tagged to the transaction, so you can see if it's lagging or not. The site that it came to, and whether it was a local, what the transaction type was. We've got the next set of information that's related to the customer. What was the card number, what was their account number, if a vehicle was used or any other odometer type information, customer related on the transaction, item related, what was the product, and it's possible that you could have multiple products be merged into one. So on Pack Pride, if you didn't carry every product they had on the network, you could create a miscellaneous product and be able to cross-reference, product 1000 on the network can go to product 42 if that's right, or sometimes you consolidate all the grades of gasoline so you don't have to track them all. And then the quantity, that's pretty obvious. And then on the pricing and taxing, these two sections at the bottom, you'll always see an original amount and a calculated amount. So the original amount is what we thought the taxes or price was from the original transaction. And then the calculated amount is what we repriced it as. So that means in this case of this one, and we actually define, so as we're looking at original and calculated, if the original amount included taxes and somebody was tax exempt, you would see that by seeing this calculated amount here would be empty. So if you had a customer that was federal excise tax exempt or state excise tax or sales tax exempt, it would show up in the original amount of taxes, but not in the calculated. And then the price, again, is that calculation. So we do most of our pricing through profiles. And with those profiles, we can really control how those prices. So if you think about the auto fueling price audit, where you can put a customer, you can put a class, you can put an item, a site specific, all of those same methods can be done through a profile, but a profile is meant more for a group transaction. So like on this card account here for Jerry's Oil, we can actually go into their account setup that we looked at the prior week, and we have these different profiles here. So we have one for remotes, we have one for extended remotes, and we have one for local. And so, the same reason those transactions are unique, your local transactions are priced, you control the pricing, but the remote are based on the transfer cost from the network that doesn't include margin. So you're going to add more to a remote transaction, whereas a local price might already be figured out with margins. And then on a retail or extended remote transaction, there's a third profile option for that because you're going to be controlling and setting those profiles off of a retail price, which already includes a markup, so there's less margin for you to claim on those extended remote. So every customer can have 3 different pricing strategies based on which profile that you assign to them. During conversion, we consider this R-G. The G is global, and then so we've got remote global, extended remote global, and in this case, this is Jerry's Oil customer. It looks like they had their own special price. So in this case, we've created a local profile through the conversion, and you can see here as we can actually drill into any one of these hyperlinks, where we can apply pricing. In this case, it says, well, if you go to site specific, it'll apply this very specific price. Otherwise, it's going to go back and use a linked profile to go to the local global. So I'm going to come back to these profiles quite a bit more here in a moment, but just want to hone in on the profile and how it works. So down at the bottom here, you can actually see all of the information on how a transaction was priced right on the screen. So again, you can always use these drill down options to go see the profile and understand more how it worked. But in this case, you can see this transaction was at site ALC. And so because of that, this ALC is not the same thing as this SLB site. So that means it's not going to use this profile. Instead, it's going to go and use this global. And you can see on the transaction here, it did use the local global profile, and it was set up as a price profile or pump price adjustment. So that means whatever the pump price that came in from the transaction, we're going to adjust that. And in this case, we added 5 cents to it. There's an optional adjustment rate where you can put additional pricing on top of the profile. And then you can also see what the original transfer cost was on that transaction. So in looking at this, it looks like for this particular customer, we're adding 5 cents to that original gross pump price. And then we've got it set to always end in a 9. So it's got that pretty in-pump number. Are there any questions on this screen before I go to talk about the profiles? All right, if there's no questions, then I'll keep going and show you more how this information ties together. So this concept of a profile, all of these profiles are very similar. So you can see here this price profile for the ER-G, the extended remote global. And then, by the way, after you go live, I wouldn't change it beforehand, but you can change these labels to be whatever you want after go live. We just need them this way for conversion purposes. But you can see each profile is set for a certain transaction type. So this one is for our extended remotes. And we can designate if this profile is global, or if it's not global, then it can be linked to a global profile. And that's the equivalent of the hierarchy and auto fueling, where if you didn't have a customer specific price record, it would then go find the next more generic price record. This works very similar to that, and then also has the ability to also link it from a customer specific setting to a global profile. So on the details here of this profile, we're actually using this as a matching mechanism. So we're saying that these first 4 columns is how to match to figure out how to price it. The last 4 transactions are how to calculate, last 4 fields. So in the example of, if it's blank, that means all. So on this first line here, we're saying all products on all networks, on all special site groups or regions is what auto fueling called site groups, or for all sites, not a specific site, but for all sites. So this is blank. So this means any record, we're going to do a pump price adjustment, and then we're going to add 5 cents to that, and then we can do the optional forced rounding to make it end in a 009. So that's one example of a profile, and I'm just going to jump into a couple of more of them. In the case of a retail transaction for extended remotes, we can have 2 price bases here. So you can have one for pump prices, and you can have one for transfer cost. So if I go to the remotes, this one's going to show a little bit more information. So this one is remotes. So this is anywhere in the network. We're saying add a transfer cost of 5 cents above transfer cost. And one of the things that converted out of auto-fueling was auto-fueling required you to put in a product, but that product is not required. So if it's going to be consistent, like since all these were 5 cents, this could actually all be removed and just have a blank line that says transfer cost plus 5 cents, and that would be sufficient. So as we're seeing some of these other examples, just trying to get a feel for how they look and will work for you, one thing to know is, as I mentioned, if these are blank, these are all, but there's a hierarchy to which one would be applied first. So the more specific you get, the more likely it is to use that record if it matches the transaction. If it doesn't match the transaction, it's going to keep searching for more generic combinations until it comes up the right one. So for example, if it's going to match on a product and a site, those are the two most specific ways it can match. Because it doesn't get any more specific than at this exact site for this exact product, this is how I want you to price the transaction. Now, it can get a little bit more generic and say, instead of a site, I want to do a group of sites. So a group of sites could be like, a region. In our office in Fort Wayne, there might be 4 or 5 Pack Pride locations that you want to group together and price together, even though they may not be yours. Or you just want to handle unique areas of that. So you can actually create groups of sites and price them accordingly too. So that's less specific than an individual site, but still more specific than a network. And so network is the next option that you could say, anywhere on the entire Pack Pride network, I'm going to give a 5 cents. If you're only a single network, you'll probably never use this network column because it's redundant. That's more meant if you've got dual networks or multiple networks. And then again, the product can be blank for all products, or it can be very specific to each one that you would need to price. I'm going to pull open a local one here, and actually I'm going to close out of this account and this transaction here. And I just want to go into the setup and pull up, see if we can't look for a couple more profiles. So here's a local global one. And it looks like people are getting a 5 cents price adjustment for all products, except for product 1 at site ALC. Then that's going to get a price of $332.99. So usually when I'm trying to train the profile concept, I like to match it up with transactions because that makes it a whole lot easier to digest. But just looking at a couple of other examples, here's a profile for another customer. It looks like they are getting a 10-cent price adjustment unless they also get, looks like they've all got their own set of pricing records. So you can see here the flexibility of, if they got it from a local site or a specific site, ALC for product number 1, we're going to charge them this $229.05. If we got it from another site, then it's going to be 10 cents above the pump price. And it looks like there's some unique pricing maybe per site if you get a couple of more local sites that are in the mix. I think, Erica, as we schedule a one-on-one training session for you, this is something we'll be reviewing in detail for that. So I'm just using your database for examples for the others. Yeah, this must be another customer that has a set price. And the other things with this from auto-fueling, if you're comparing the auto-fueling price list, price audit report to what the profiles look like, it's also important to note that we're trying to convert it out of the system, but sometimes when we convert that information, it is not how I would recommend it be set up from scratch. So what I mean by that is, like, if this customer is 600, right now I see them being set up with a individual price for that date. Well, if that doesn't make sense for a customer to maintain an individual price, you could actually maintain one index and do deviations. So this rate field is actually meant to be a deviation in more times than not, so that you could actually say, well, this customer gets 10 cents above the price that I'm going to maintain on my index. So whenever you see this rate here, this is in addition to whatever the basis is. So in this case, the basis is saying take a local index and add $2.55, 71 cents to it. I don't know that that's how I would recommend doing it. This might be a +0, and then you would actually maintain the rates and the price indexes I'm going to show next. So from here, if we're looking at these transactions, and we can look at index pricing by site group, this is where you would actually maintain those prices that change. So we have, and just looking again, and I'm not trying to pick on Erica's data, but it's a good example, right, to see real data. But we can see in here that it looks like all these indexes are based on customers, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to track based on customers if you could create one local index and say, well, this customer is 5 cents above my local index. It makes it a lot easier, and you don't have to put in, you can put in a deviation once, and you don't have to put in a price every single day for every single customer combination. So from here, we'd be able to pick, and I see one other piece of setup here that's missing, and that's the actual site group as well. From our product listing here, we can maintain this pricing per product and then maintain in a specific price. And this is what I mean by a deviation. That we may not want to do a deviation. You know, if you could set this up once and then set up everybody as a deviation off the top of that, it's going to be a whole lot easier for you to maintain or create new prices for one local index instead of, you know, if you got 5 products and you're maintaining it for 50 different customers, you know, then that's 250 records you got to create prices for. Versus if you put everybody as a deviation off of this price, and you can say 5 cents off or 2 cents down or whatever else, and then you just have to maintain it that one time for those 5 products. Now, sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. You need, you may need an index for an OPUS contract with a government customer. You might need a special price that just doesn't, changes every single day, and it's, the owner comes up with a number, and you just don't know. There's no set math formula that will calculate it every day. So you may still have to maintain some price indexes like that. But whenever possible, definitely recommend using deviations from an index instead of these profiles here. And this, like I said, again, is just conversion from the auto fueling platform. It had a different methodology, whereas if we wanted this to actually say, okay, well, instead, let's use this, point it to the local index, and then this is where we could add those 5 cents on top of the local index instead of having the whole price. And I should probably do it for product 42 since that was my example. Are the profiles making sense? Are there questions on the profiles so far? So if there's no questions, I'll just pop into a couple more transactions and we'll use some more examples to help bring it all together. And then, as we schedule those additional one-on-one sessions, then we'll definitely be tying that together for you. So it'll make more sense as you're looking at a set of transactions. You imported an auto fueling and imported an I-21 side by side. So if I look at the transaction list, and so as I'm auditing out this transaction list, I can see, here's some examples of, I can even see what profile was used when it calculated pricing. So I can see if this one used the global profile, this one used a specific customer profile. All that information is available in the grid that makes it really easy to identify what's going on with the transaction. And it looks like ALC is your only local site. Is that correct, Erica? That ALC is the primary local site? I'll pick a diesel transaction here. So from here on this diesel transaction, did I get off-road or on-road? Erica, for this transaction, can you confirm is product 53 on-road or off-road? On-road, okay. That's what I was wondering, if those taxes look like they're backwards, like those might be the taxes for off-road versus on-road. Okay, and then, so I see your note that this is also the sales, a tax exempt customer, but you said sales tax only is exempt from the chat. You mean sales tax or do you mean state excise tax? Okay. So let me take this transaction. Okay, so this product 53, it looks like it got set to off-road and needs to be set to on-road. All right, now we've got more taxes. We got federal excise tax for diesel, the 17 cents Tennessee tax. And then looks like we've also got some other taxes here. Craig, if you want to make a note, we got to check the taxes for, I'm not seeing why this other tax for gas should be showing up on here.
For gas should be there. Yeah, it's not, shouldn't be there. I have to check taxes on them. Okay.
Okay. So just looking at this transaction briefly, with knowing there's some tax adjustments to be made, but if I look at the total transaction here and I'm trying to tie out the pricing, then I can see that on this price profile, it was done through a local index, and then that local index was actually and this was the area where I was talking about, it's adding 2.4169 to no price index. And so typically we would flip that around and have the base price being added to an index. So here you can see the index came out as 0, there was no index found, but then it added 2.4169 to it. And we must be set to round to 9, and that's where we got that number from.
You can recalculate it. Should take the gas tax out.
All right, getting closer. Okay. So luckily, a lot of these settings are one time, and it doesn't have to be done with reconversion. It doesn't have to be done and go live. But this is exactly the reason why we want you to process in transactions, import them in, compare them in parallel, and make sure that pricing and taxing is coming out, in line with auto fueling. And there is some potential for rounding differences between the two systems. You may see some transactions up a penny, some transactions down a penny. So one other thing I want to look at on this transaction, since this is Erica saying this is her tax exempt customer, I'm going to go into the sales menu, into the customer screen that we saw last week as well. And then I'm just going to bring up this customer account so we can look at their exemptions. So from the customer tab, we have the ability to show the tax exemptions that are on file. And this bottom section is showing those tax exemptions. Craig, can you check the notes if we've had these records converted for JPM?
The files there, I'm curious whether since taxes weren't set, I'm wondering if it's not been applied yet. I can do it real quick.
Yeah, okay. So in this, and I just saw a comment from Erica that it is exempt for federal and state. Okay. So then you're expecting, and that's for like gas and diesel, right? So just, and Craig, you said you're going to try and import this in.
Right, I'm opening it up now. So give me 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay, yeah, I won't save what we're doing, all this stuff. But from here, you can actually pick which taxes. So like this one's, if they're exempt from state excise tax, and you can put in a start date, and you can make that effective for a specific tax code, for tax class, or for only certain items that might be eligible for those exemptions. And just like some of the other profiles and things we've talked about, that if you leave it blank, it means this is good for all ship-to locations, all items, but for this specific tax code here, for diesel, we're saying that this customer is going to be exempt. So if I save that one, And get that required field happy. And then if I recalculate this, you'll notice now that I added that exemption and recalculated the transaction that state excise tax for diesel is no longer showing up on the calculated amount. And then that is actually reduced from the 2.4169 is subtracted off that 17 cents per gallon to get us to this 2.249. Go ahead and remove that exemption since Craig's in the process of importing them in for you.
Yeah, I'm getting an error on the import, so I'll have to see what it is here. Item category does not exist, so I'll have to see what it's trying to match here.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I set that one back to not exempt just so we could see the differences on the transaction. Okay, so with the settings that we've made for different transactions, the different tax settings we've already done, this is, one of those examples where I would say, okay, let's now change it to be, a different type of transaction or re-import, reprocess some of the data. So these other transactions we have here is transactions from the network. And so you can see here, if we look at some of these other transactions, how they priced or taxed. So this is not your site, right? It's a site on the network. This is an extended remote or retail site. And on this transaction, for product 2, we can see that it's using our standard profile and it added 5 cents. So if you look at 2.939 plus 5 cents is 2.989. So we really tried to make it self-defining so that if you ever are looking at a transaction and try to audit and understand how did it get its price, that all of that information is captured and stored on the transaction here to make it easier for you. So you can see, yes, we did make money, how much money did we make, and if there's an additional markup there or not. And then we can see here's some taxes from the network. And, as I mentioned, you only need to maintain taxes for your sites. For remote sites, we will actually take the taxes from the transaction file, and that's what will get set up here. So these two different taxes actually came from the tax price import file, and that's how they got set. And go back to that transaction list here. If I look at a couple of these other transactions, looks like another extended remote transaction. And so again, that same 5 cents. And it looks like almost all of your extended remotes are priced the same way for the retail transactions. So the first couple here, I'll just open these up. You can also multi-select these rows. So if you see how I've highlighted in multiple rows, each one you click just gets them all, and you can open all 3 records. So that makes it so when you're scrolling through and navigating the records, you can just scroll, see down here at the bottom where it's got page 1 of. You can actually see each transaction. So in this example, now we've got a price profile that's doing transfer cost plus 5 cents. And that's a good question on the taxes, Erica. Those should also be coming in, and we're going to do some more checking on the taxes just from the number of things we've seen so far that they should all have taxes on them. And this one actually probably got reset because this was product 53 and I changed it to a different category. So if we re-import this file, I think those taxes are going to come in now. So we've got transfer cost 5 cents. So the original transfer cost from Pack Pride, this is 2.177 number, and we add 5 cents to that and round it off to a 9, and we're going to get this 2.229 number there. And I'm going to go ahead and just batch delete and then bring in those transactions one more time, and we'll see if we've got all the taxes and the changes. And all right. All right, found your taxes. It's all about having the right setup. I'm just poking around looking for taxes. It looks like all the transactions are showing taxes now, or at least these remote ones are showing taxes, and let's clear that out. All right, so this, as I'm just looking for a different product, different example, I noticed it had 0 on the taxes, and I'm wondering, that looks like deaf to me. Are you collecting sales tax on death in Tennessee then, or in Tennessee? Should it be, I guess, is my real question. Okay, so we'll look at what's going on with that sales tax. It was in the original amount, so unless this customer happens to be sales tax exempt, I would expect that calculated amount to match the original. Just so as we're spot checking transactions, let me just look for different types of products. All right, so that's product 2. This must be not the product that you carry. So that's apparently they still sell it without ethanol in some places, or their registers are set up that way. So that one looks okay. It's product 42 at your site. Product 53 at your site. Other sites on the network. So really, it's primarily just the 2 products that you're selling. It looks like, oh, here's a couple of mid-grades I missed. So really, all I'm doing is trying to slice this data into different ways, checking the transactions that, if you've got 10 transactions that are exactly the same product, priced the same way to the same customer and taxed the same way, you don't have to check them all as long as the totals are matching up. So here's some more examples for the gasoline, the pricing there. But this looks like it's probably a mid-grade. Yeah, 10% mid-grade. And then this is probably our premium. But then again, taxed the same way as gas is unlead. So our final step after auditing out the transactions would be to actually complete this batch posting routine. And then this batch posting routine we'll take all of the transactions that are laid out, and you would select all. And I'm not going to post these until we've done more review on it, but basically a transaction, once you've reviewed everything you've imported to make sure that it's priced and taxed as you would expect, then you would be posting those transactions, and that's when they'll be available to review, either to send out to an invoice to a customer or to update their AR, update the future AR for them in real time as you post data. So you would just hit the post, and it would run through and update all those transactions. So knowing that we still have some cleanup we're doing and practicing on these files, we don't want to do any posting right this moment. But I think the key next step for us, right, just as we've seen by looking at some of the JPM's data that, we've been, there's definitely taxes and prices and things to clean up and review and, have those one-on-one conversations about how should it look for you, how should it work for you, do you want to change things a little bit from how you're doing an auto fueling, or just ways to understand it. Okay. So I think for today's session, then, if there's any other questions, I'll take more questions or more specifics on this. But otherwise, that was what I wanted to review for putting in pricing, importing transactions, and auditing them and understanding how the price profiles work.